Welcome, John, the man, the myth, the legend, John Brandt. Thanks for doing this with me.
Sorry about the disaster in my office. We just got back from a trip to Bali. I had to do a site survey.
Oh, cool. In Bali. Great.
Yeah.
So I'll just jump right into the interview if that's all right. My first question was how you got into acoustics. What's your story, your background? How did you become interested in acoustics and studio design?
It really began when I was about 10, 11 years old. My grandfather, on my mother's side, passed away. And well, before he did, he gave me a tape recorder. It was a really nice tape recorder. And I used to do like sciencey stuff with it. Instead of using a microphone, I would hook directly to the speaker on the TV when they played The Wizard of Oz and recorded the whole thing. And on my paper route, I'd pick up TV sets and stuff and junk radios and play with them, make things out of them. One TV set I made an oscilloscope out of.
Wow. Crazy. You know? How old were you when you did that?
11.
Wow. So you've always been interested in learning how things work and science and a classic engineering mind.
Yeah, I had books like, where is it? Where is this book? Books like this when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
Shows all kinds of science experiments you could do, all kinds of things you can make. And I was a maker and a doer back then. I really didn't do any quote unquote science when I was a kid. I just like, I'll make this, you know.
Yeah.
You could get kits in those days where you do radium experiments.
Radium?
Little did we know that they could kill you, you know, this kind of stuff. I play with mercury in my hand. Ooh,
oh my gosh.
You know, I would coat quarters and dimes with mercury and they'd be all slippery.
Wow.
That's probably why I'm, a little bit.
That's funny.
Yeah. And being a musician, I wanted to be in a band or do this and stuff. As soon as I graduated from high school, I had enrolled in college for music. But that summer I left. I joined several groups that were doing stuff as a roadie and technician. And learning the whole time, and mixing for stage, mixing for house, things like that. Eventually went to Europe. And I got the privilege of working with Jeremy Spencer, Fleetwood Mac, as his main tech and guitar roadie. Graduated to front of house sound for him, and then many other groups. And, got in the studio and did engineering and got that bug. How to mix and produce and on and on and on. Ended up in Nashville and Detroit. Many years in Nashville, and I worked mostly with studios, perfecting their systems and acoustics. And I'm always interested in acoustics and seeing what does what, It's been an exponential curve in my learning. So the latter years of my life is gone way up because I now understand how to do research and how to look for the evidence rather than and so it's been a fun journey.
Yeah, that's one thing that always impressed me because I interviewed a few different acousticians and designers and did some research online trying to figure out, for my studio who I was going to choose. And yeah, one thing that always impressed me about you is that data-driven mindset that you're always searching to improve your designs and understand, because acoustics is a complex science. I don't think people realize just how complex, you have all these different surfaces and pressure waves across the frequency spectrum and your environment. There's soundproofing, and then there's internal acoustics and that whole thing. And yeah, it's not just a simple, build some bass traps and build some diffusers and throw them up and it's going to work like you would expect it to. It's quite complex, at least the more I've learned about it. the more I've been impressed. And I'm sure that's how a lot of subjects are. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
You don't know. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
It's helped me tremendously to be involved in every part of the industry. And that means musician, engineer, producer, technician, and building. I've done a lot of contracting as well. So
you've really been involved in all aspects. It sounds like you started out as an engineer, right? You did live front of house stuff, live mixing, and then some studio work. What helped you transition from engineer and producing and music into more of a specialized role as a studio designer and
I'd say the universe forced it upon me. No, the thing is, some people get it when they're in their 20s. I know what I'm supposed to do. Right. This is my purpose. I've created this purpose for myself, and I'm going to go do this. And they find it. It took me till I was about 45, 50 years old.
Yeah.
To really focus on my purpose. Especially, I've lived a rock and roll lifestyle. Max, please.
He wants to be included.
It's like working with a toddler. All right, be good. Good. All
right. I love dogs. We got 2, so I know how it is. So you kind of didn't specialize in acoustics until later on in life. You didn't find that purpose.
Yeah, I was always part and parcel of everything I was doing, but I would read books and study the concepts, but come to find out when I did them, they didn't quite work the way they said they would. Why it's that, and there's so much opinion, personal opinion and subjective thoughts and views on it that it tends to confuse the subject. Need to find out. Show me the evidence. Let's see what this really does. So
and you have a lab, right? Or at some point obtained.
I don't, but Ron does, and we work together with my partner. And I have put my money. This is an important part for any acousticians out there. Put your money where your mouth is. You have an idea, get it tested, and then you can make statements. Okay, this does this, and that does that. When I first did testing, I had some of these ideas. I want this tested, and we're going to see. And I expected certain results, and when they came back, oh shit, that didn't work like I thought it would. And that's how you have to look at it. I've got an idea. It's probably wrong, but let's test it and find out, and just accept whatever the facts are about it, the data, and talk to other scientists and other acousticians, and that way you get their input. And it's not that not necessarily their ideas are correct either. Ask the hard questions and not accept just an opinion for an answer. We'll go, we need to test that then. That's what we've been doing.
That's the nature of good science, really. You have a hypothesis or an idea, and you put it to the test, and you see what comes back. And often it's wrong, or you might learn something new, and then you might retest and try again.
We do. You got to accept whatever it is,
Yeah. That's one thing I find interesting is you can find so many opinions. There's a lot of conflicting advice and people arguing back and forth, should you have an air gap or not have an air gap, or RFZ versus LEDE versus non-environment, and these different philosophies for designing. And again, what really impressed me about you is that you're willing to test it out, see the data, adapt, adjust. You're not just sticking with kind of a template and redoing that for 20 years. You're trying to constantly improve your designs, which leads to my next question on studio design philosophies. Would you say you have a design philosophy? Is it a mix? Your personal leanings in acoustics? I
initially called it the BNE criteria, balanced non-environment, but I've been trying to rewrite it so it's better. But the idea is that, well, when you go in to mix a record, you want to hear what's on tape. You don't want to hear the speakers. You don't want to hear your desk. You don't want to hear your room. You want to hear what's on the record. When you press play, you want to be able, especially, to hear the bass. And we find that the very best engineers out there, the best mixers and mastering engineers, are those. I mean, they work many times in not very good rooms, but they're the best at guessing what's going on, and they make the hits. I worked with Eddie Kramer, and I just couldn't believe what he would hear and do, and it would just be magic. And I would try to do it afterwards. I remember we did one full day session, and I brought the artist in and said, "You want to try this other track?" Sure. So we recorded it, and I tried to mix it. Yeah. And that's after working several days with Eddie. And, it's at that point, I kind of had a eureka moment. I'm better at the technical. Technical is my thing, data-driven stuff. And when I'm listening in a room, I hear everything. And it's just like, I don't have the algorithms in my jellyware to compensate for that room. So I needed a design of a room that would fix all that for me. And I could just hear, like when you do a website design, it's what you see is what you get. Well, a mix room should be what you hear is what you get. Exactly.
Yeah.
That should be. So,
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is experience, right? And these great engineers, they do it so much and it become often very used to a specific environment or speakers, or they might mix on, a certain desk or with certain monitors. And they learn those things so well that even when they change room to room, they can almost compensate. They can listen to their favorite records or mixes, and their brain just kind of compensates for all those issues, and they somehow right. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think acoustics in your room is another tool. Just like you can learn to mix on crappy little speakers, and if you do it for enough years, you can become a decent mix engineer. But you're going to spend a lot of time fighting against that tool, or working around the tool, or learning how to compensate for what's not there. So why not, improve your tool set to the degree that you can? Obviously, we all have limited resources, budgets, and time, and all that. But the better your tools, the quicker you can get the job done. And especially nowadays, with just how full frequency everything is, modern mixes extend a whole octave or more lower than in the past. You really got to be able to manage from 30, 40 hertz all the way up to the limit of human hearing to really be competitive as a mix or mastering engineer. Budgets are smaller, right? Oftentimes we have to turn around things very quickly, and so you don't want to be second guessing or taking mixes out to your car and then out to some other. You want to be able to get
no idea how many stereo FM transmitters I made when I was in Nashville. So they set it on the console, hook it up to the 2-mix bus. You need to check your mix, run out to the car and tune to that station. Okay, I'll adjust it. You run back and forth. So burning CDs is and it's different when you're tracking. You're creating sound. You're creating a mix. You want to be able to capture what you hear in your head when you're tracking. And I always say, when it comes to tracking, there are no rules. It's a creative thing, and you want to capture that sound or that tone or this thing that you're trying to put together. So there are no really set ways to do that. There are some very good drum miking techniques and a lot of things that people talk about, and it's all great. You need to find what works for you and the song. But when it comes to mixing, it needs to be, the room has to be right so that you can hear everything.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but tracking, I think that's right. You can have big boomy, Led Zeppelin style drums, John Bonham with big old echoes, or slapback, or you could go for a super tight, dead 70s sound. And really, like you said, it's a creative thing. You don't necessarily need one specific type of sound. The environment or the room you record in, the musicians you record with becomes part of the creative aspect. Yeah. And so I think it's more important in tracking to be able to get what's in your mind onto the record, so if you want those big drums, know how to create those spaces, or in this, a lot of times nowadays we've got artificial delays and reverbs and plugins which do a decent job. I still love the sound of a natural room, like getting a space where you can hear the room, getting musicians together where there's a little bit of mic bleed, maybe stepping back the microphones when that's what the music calls for. There's nothing quite like hearing a real space with great musicians. You can't really recreate that with plugins in the box. You can do cool stuff with artificial sounds and crazy long echoes and reverbs, but that natural sound of real musicians in a room you can't quite recreate any other way, other than just have a good sounding room and good mic techniques and good musicians.
Yeah, when you can get a group together and they're eye to eye and face to face, and they work it together, that's when the muse comes into the room and the magic happens, and you got to record it. But in a reverberant space, it's never going to happen. It's difficult. Take pop music or rock music, the space needs to be fairly tight. If you want the drums to have a big recorded, cathedral sound, I always recommend, instead of building something like that, because that's basically used for that one sound.
Right, echo chamber.
Go rent a cathedral church for the day. Track your drums in there, then take it back and do everything else in the studio.
Yeah, cool.
Something like that.
Yeah. Getting back to the different design philosophies, LED, live in, dead end. I don't remember which started original, which was first. Was it LED and then RFC?
Davis and Davis did paper on LEDE, and they got the Synod Forum group, and it's very, very good stuff came out of that, and because they were data driven, and it's some of the most useful designs came out of that. Doesn't mean it's the best, but it started it, and that's marvelous, and they still have some very, very valid points and very good information.
And was RFZ an evolution from that, or a different approach?
It's just twisted around. This is D'Antonio's version of LEDE.
Yeah. Okay. Twisted around because LED is supposedly dead up front, reflective
front dead,
in the rear.
Back, and RFZ is angled sections that reflect everything to the back, and then you got diffraction, diffusion back. I don't call it diffusion; it's diffraction and phase change is what it is. And it's the same criteria as LEDE. Same everything, really the same. It's just the absorption and diffraction are in different spots.
But you mentioned to me before on our first call, I remember it was a good start, sort of. The way I understood it is it's a good start, but it's like reading a textbook from 30, 40 years ago. We've learned since then. Yes. We've progressed beyond. So how would you describe that progression? Where are we at now? Maybe you could describe a bit of your approach and how it differs perhaps from LED or RFC or other philosophies.
With the B&E, we treat 5 surfaces fully, similar to a Tom Hidley room. However, even Hidley design used a lot of things like these quote-unquote wave guides and very deep treatment, deep pockets of, stuff. And through testing, we found out that they didn't do what he thought they did, But the room worked, of course, But there's a lot of people that don't like non-environment. And that's normal because we're human beings, and
because it's overly dead. Is that it doesn't like, sound?
You don't hear the walls, and it's like, you hear the front wall because he usually did hard flushes, which is a reflective front wall and floor. But other than that, you could be up on a pedestal up in the air with no sides and a little wall in front of you, and it's kind of disconcerting to the human animal We get like, if we don't know what's there, we can't hear it. It's like, I could fall into a precipice, or whenever you get that, the flight or fight endorphins going in, and you get stressed. Even though you don't know it, you feel stressed. You feel, God, I need to get out and have a cup of coffee. I need to smoke a cigarette. I got to get out and fresh air,
Okay.
That a lot of people feel that way.
In the straightforward non-environment approach, right? Which is essentially removing the room as much as possible, so you have direct sound from the
Commander Data from Star Trek would do just fine in there because he doesn't have But for humans, we need reflections and we need a sense of space. That's why I have a lot of diffraction behind the engineer, left and right, back, and I've developed a new thing in most of my control rooms where we put a curved rear wall in the back. And because I'm sure everybody listening will note that no matter what control room they're in, if it's got a flat back wall, even though it's treated well, you still get a null at the mix position. You still get this null, the mid-low frequency null. That's from that return reflection from
back
the back
wall reflection,
homing with the oncoming.
I've seen a lot of engineers who dive into the acoustic side of that, talking about issues around 100 hertz or 150 or 120, depending on the dimensions of the room and how it's interacting. That's a very typical thing, right? And my understanding is you could have nulls or peaks depending on just how things are coming together. And then when you treat one thing, you might see it sort of flip. It's like you remove one error or one issue and you see something else.
That's a DIY approach, doing it one at a time. You think, we put this in and it was magic, just this thing.
Right.
It's not that thing. You don't understand that it's the whole room and it all kind of works together. But that curve breaks up the pressure wave. It breaks it up so it's not so strong there at the mixed position. So it reduces that null, sometimes eliminates it.
Cool. That's what we're working on right now in terms of construction on my studio. So I'll document that and show viewers some photos and video footage as we build that out. They can kind of see how it comes together. So getting back to the designs, pure non-environment can feel too dead if you're not used to it, at least. And so that's why, is that the reason you incorporate more diffusion or diffraction? And that's what the balanced part of the term signifies, balanced non-environment?
Yeah, it needs to be balanced so that you're comfortable in there. When you go in there, you feel, this feels good. I'm excited to get to work,
And is that mostly mid to upper frequencies that you want to feel?
It's often, mid to upper. It's a psychoacoustic thing, and I like to my little joke is it's 90% psycho and 10% acoustics. Psychoacoustics.
I'm sure we can all relate to that. Wow, what's going on?
What's this madness from Brandt?
I'm so excited to get for an update for people following this build thing I'm doing. We just shipped all the acoustic treatment, so I'm super excited to finally receive that and get that installed and see what difference that makes. That leads me to my next question on measurement. What do you typically recommend engineers or people building a studio do? Do you measure before and after? What's your preferred approach? And what's the when to measure and how to measure and what does that process look like?
Yes, once the shell is complete and you have doors and windows installed, then you can measure the empty room and see how well it matches the room mode calculator. Just got to remember that a room mode calculator assumes that the walls and ceiling and floor, everything is solid, 8-foot thick concrete. Okay, it assumes that it's just perfectly rigid.
That there's no leakage and there's no angle. The angles are perfect, dimensions are perfect.
About perfect. You can slant a wall, you're just going to still have those modes.
Interesting.
Yeah, you still have modal activity. So.
Okay. So that, would you say the room mode calculator is still fairly accurate, even given the imperfections of
it's been
most?
pretty darn accurate. The low end is like, it depends on the wall construction and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Most important thing you have to have in a mixing room is uniformity in mass on the left and right walls. If you don't, if one is like a thin gypsum board and the other is solid concrete, you're basically just going to shift towards the thinner wall. It's going to skew the imaging. You need a good, like I said, I recently did a post, architect saying, if the foundation rotten, everything's rotten. So that's the foundation.
So going back to measurement, so you could measure sort of the empty shell once you got doors and windows and you have a closed space. When do you then typically recommend that people measure? And do they use REW? RemuQ Wizard. Yeah. Is that the tool?
I wouldn't ask any of my clients to buy specialty software just because I run eSera. I've got it running on this laptop over here, Ezra, and that's what I pay, $2,800 or more.
Okay. Well, REW does a decent job for.
It's free, and it get me enough data to say, oh yeah, okay, this is what's going on.
So with the next measurement, so you could measure empty shell again, and then the next measurement would be after installing all the acoustic treatment.
After everything's complete. Yeah, don't do a gradual thing because it's like you're going to
drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, you get confused, and it's a waste of time. So, but when you do the measurements, you want to do measurements in all different spots in the room, and you want to look at an average of your T20. T20 is a little closer to how humans perceive reverberation. Okay.
What is T20? Is that?
It's the reverberation time.
The waterfall.
RT60. Just look at the RT60 tab and look at the T20. Just uncheck all the others and look at T20. And we're looking for a certain slope. Bump in the low end and goes down, flattens out by 200, and should level out. Should never take a dive in the upper mid-range. Should go out and roll off nice, starting around 4 to 8K, and that's fine. After 8K or after 4K, we got air absorption that goes into the thing, so you're going to have a little fall off on the top. It's normal. We expect it. But that will more closely.
And what's a good criteria? Sorry, there's a bit of a lag. Sorry if I'm interrupting, but on that low end, what's the good target or threshold you don't want to be above when it comes to 200 to 100 hertz and below? Is it a gradual?
You can have a 25% rise in the T20 from 200 to 63 hertz. You can have a 25% rise, sometimes even more, and it's okay because humans, we cannot hear bass very well. So as an example, you take 80 decibels at 1 kilohertz, that level of sound. In order to hear 20 hertz, the same level, it has to be about 118 decibels.
Wow. That much louder.
Yeah.
Is that also part of the reason we tend to like, or at least I know a lot of engineers like more gradual, slow. They don't want a completely flat response, right, from the room or the speakers. No. And it particularly if they're using something like Trinov or Soundworks room correction, to try to get things as flat as possible often isn't the ideal target. We typically, a lot of us like something a little bit more sloped. Is that in your experience?
Like a little we need it. Otherwise, what we tend to do is when we're mixing, we'll crank it up, and then the mix is muddy in the car or wherever else. It's like, it's just
we overcompensate. Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into my next question is remote versus on-site. Some designers, will go on-site and do install. I know you've done some installs on-site, but most of your design is remote. How does that work, and what are kind of the pros or cons, or how do you manage that process of being 100, at least in this case, I'm building a studio in Mexico. It's 100% virtual remote. How does that process look?
Well, I enjoy it. No, I'm just joking. It's easier for me and for the client because they don't have to pay airfare and all this on site. my daily on-site is $2,500.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go there. It could be terrible if you have a dedicated person or yourself who can document or have meetings like this with me as you're building. How about this? Okay, should we put it like this or like that? That's easy. It's like I'm there.
Right.
And because I've been, here's the key. I've been there and done that many, many times, and I can look at something now and I can see what sound is going to do. That takes a lot of experience and knowledge of how sound works. But I can just see sound. So, if I look at window cavities, you have a deep pocket where there's a window there. Sometimes we put an absorption in there because then it becomes a trap. Otherwise, it becomes a resonator. All kinds of things, but it's easy for me to help you remote, and it saves a ton of money.
Yeah.
And instead of being maybe a $50,000 bill, it would become a $250,000 bill, and it's like,
sure, yeah.
I know the on-site guys love it. They're making some money, and that's good for them. That's fine.
Yeah, if it's a huge, media corporation or someone who's got the resources and money, maybe they want to have them there on site. But your point, which is well taken, and in my case is what I was looking for. We're trying to get the most bang for our buck, right? We're trying to do what we can with limited resources and constant communication. In my experience with you, you've been very, very responsive in terms of back and forth issues. Hey, they built this thing wrong. They messed this up. How do we fix it? What do we do next?
That's the issue.
How do we salvage this?
The main issue with doing remote.
Yeah.
You'll be out of touch for a few days and fuck it up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's something I certainly didn't. I knew it was going to be a challenge here in Mexico, but yeah, it's a tough thing. You got to really supervise and make sure people are doing things right. Fortunately, in my case, there were no major mess ups that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. It was more like, hey, we got to fix this before we go into the next step. Like, you got to make those windows right. You got to, one example is they put what they call them castillos or castles, like steel reinforcement. They connected the two walls with that kind of like thin rebar. Essentially, they connected the walls with that. When I told them not to do that, and I given them plans, so they had to chip out the concrete and redo that and pull those out and move them over. And so it was a bit of a hassle and a bit of a headache and a little stressful. But it wasn't. We hadn't already finished all the walls. I caught it at a point where we were able to fix it.
Even on site. I remember. I think Tom Hidley was talking about a build that he did in Japan, and they tested the partitions, and it was terrible isolation. He said, "What is wrong with this?" And he says, "Okay, open this wall up." And they looked down the wall, and they had blocking in between for all over the isolated wall. It was all blocked into the structure. He said, "Oh God, get in there and take all that shit out."
Yeah, in this build series, that's part of what I want to document is, learn from my mistakes. Don't do this. Another thing they did was cut the wires. We have kind of a thick cable running from the front of our lot back here, and essentially they cut 6 or 7 of those smaller wires, part of the gauge. They just cut them so they could fit them into the panel instead of buying the proper panel or the proper adapters or whatever to get so it's essentially like having a smaller gauge, a smaller cable the whole length of the way, because at the end you just cut 6 or 7 of
if you got a thinner gauge, you got a big gauge going here and a thinner gauge. What that is, that's a resistor, and it's going to heat up. It's
So all kinds of crazy stuff you deal with. What I was getting at was, at least in my experience, it's been quite easy to reach out and ask for assistance, and you've been really responsive. So, you save a lot of money, but you're still there to help troubleshoot or figure things out. If you have a question, which I greatly appreciate, because I'm not a super handy guy. I don't have a ton of build experience. I can understand the plans and I can, read things pretty well and get up to speed. but when it comes to hands-on experience, I don't have a lot of it. So I need that support, and you've been
you got me.
Support.
You got me. I'm
Yeah.
always here for you.
Are there any kind of like common mistakes you see, either common DIY mistakes or even with professional plans? And what are some of the most typical mistakes you've seen in your experience?
Most of the typical mistakes are done by contractors who look at the plans and say, okay, we're going to build this just like a house. And they don't follow the plans. And, things like if especially like in the U.S. and in some parts of Europe, they use sheet goods and framing materials, like studs. When you're doing sheet goods in the corners, we stack them pretty thick. I mean, we got OSB or plywood and a couple layers of thick drywall. Yeah. And what that does in a corner, it pushes everything out from the corner. And if you don't have a stud there to screw the last sheet into, you're screwed. So I use double studs in the corners, and sometimes they just don't do it. I'll see on the photos they send of the framing. I say, wait, what's going on here? Where's the stud? Yeah. Where are the corners locked together? You got to lock them together. That kind of stuff. Just real simple things.
Yeah. What about budget? I know a lot of people I collaborate with are on limited budgets. Some of us have, more to spend or less. How do we get the most bang for our buck, would you say, instead of just spending on stuff that doesn't make a difference? Material
selection is very important. There are some things that you can swap out, no problem. As far as soundproofing and whatnot, just get the cheapest fiber to fill the walls with. It works. I have a little joke about that. Is that you go and figure out how much insulation you're going to need in your walls for soundproofing, okay? And then you price out the most expensive, heavy rock wool you can find, okay? And you put the cash in your hand. Then you go to the store and you get the cheapest fiberglass, and you put that in there. And then you take all your money that you got left over and put it through the paper shredder, put that in the wall, and you'll have this exact same result acoustically. So, because people think that they're adding.
So rock wool being the ideal insulation is a myth, you'd say? That's not important.
Yeah, it's a myth. For sound, okay? For insulation, it's pretty damn good. There's fiberglass products that are pretty damn good, and you want to look at your codes for that. Now, you can use rock wool or fiberglass in the walls. Doesn't really matter. Just get the cheaper stuff. The lightweight stuff is fine, because in those wall cavities, you have a space at the most about this much. Sometimes you have this much. It's great. It's that frequency. This distance, it's less than 2 feet, so it's above around 300-400 hertz in this space. In this space, it's even higher. So those are the frequencies you need to damp with that insulation. Just these frequencies.
Because the low end stuff is just going through or reflecting off it. It's a hard, like concrete.
Stopped by the partitions and etc. It does not affect soundproofing. As to how dense that stuff is. Just needs damping and absorption in the cavity, and that will increase your sound transmission loss by 5 to 6 dB, sometimes even up to 10 dB. So it depends on how well filled the cavity is.
Okay. So good material selection, not wasting money on stuff that's not going to make a difference. And what, in your experience, is a realistic budget, again, just for a control room, let's say a mid-sized control room, if people are thinking through this?
To build. If you're going to DIY build it, if you have good plans, it may run you anywhere from say $17,000 to $28,000 for material. To contract it out, it could be 3 times that. Now that's probably just treatment. It could cost contracted a room by itself, structure, isolation, everything, HVAC, wiring could cost, $60K to build.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But often what you want to do is you want to look at your budget, what you think it's going to cost. And I get this from Max Deering, my friend. He has Dark Pines in North Carolina, I think. He's got a nice studio there. Rod Gervais designed it for him. And he says you figure out how much you think it's going to cost. You've run the numbers. You really kind of work on it really well and get a good, cost estimate.
Mm-hmm.
Multiply that times 3, and you're closer to the mark.
Oh gosh, yeah. I wish I'd known that. I always think, oh yeah, to add 10, 20%, and maybe 30%, it'll be good. But same thing in my experience. At the very least, double your number, if not triple, and you're closer to what it's actually going to cost.
And if you don't have it right now, don't go bankrupt trying to do it. Just do what you can, and you got an empty room. At least it's a good shell, and it's a good foundation for the acoustics. Then you can grab a few panels, put your speakers in, and work. It's pretty hard, but work until you can make some money to finish it up. And I hate to see people going in debt and losing it because of a dream.
Yeah, you got to be smart about your investment, and it's okay to do it piece by piece. Is your point? Do you have any opinions on DIY acoustics? In terms of the different bass traps that they make versus tube traps and the kind of diffusers you can buy pre-made. There's different packages. I'm sure you're aware of and have seen all these.
They're okay
lots
if
of companies,
you're a bedroom studio, or if you have a temporary situation. You got to do what you got to do. You got to get to work. You got to work. Well, just do it and work. Just minimal stuff. Go. It's just like in
a situation like that, would you recommend basically broadband absorption? Just get kind of thick broadband panels and places like for someone who's working with what they have to.
Yeah, that's just about all there is available. You can't find any diffraction devices that are applicable that would really help you much. These diffusers, there are some very good diffusers, what they call diffusers, but that's diffraction and phase change, which is helpful, but you have to know where to put it and how it works, and what's your target. But I wouldn't go too crazy with off the shelf stuff, because most of it does not really perform like they say it does, because the lab where these things are tested is not really valid below 125 hertz. So if they say, we got these membrane things that work down to 60 or 50 hertz, and how do you know? They don't know. Just guessing.
And why is that?
It's incapable of measuring that low. These small laboratories, they're only about 200 to 200 cubic meters. That's it.
So they're just not large enough. The labs aren't large enough to allow those bigger waves, lower frequency sound waves to really develop.
Yeah, you need
test
5 overlapping modes in order to test at that frequency.
And Ron has that. Is that correct?
He has that in the lab. Oh, news. We're moving the lab. We're getting ready to pack it up, bring it here to Indonesia.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir.
Cool.
And
what was the impetus for that?
Political.
Yeah.
No, political, because his business is shut down because of Canada won't send anything to be tested due to the politics.
Wow.
So it's put him out of business, basically.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
But I want him here anyway. I've been trying to build a lab here for a long time, and so it's on the move. It's progressing. So this is exciting for me.
Cool. Well, that's good to hear.
We could get Ron living just next door down here, and he and I could sit in here and work on stuff, and he could do consulting here. It's going to be marvelous. Really
Very cool. Forward to it. How long have you and Ron been partners?
Several years, 5 at least. Yeah. Anyway.
John, what's your opinion on room correction? You know, SonarWorks, Sound Reference, or IK Multimedia has their own thing. Trinoff are kind of the more fancy hardware units that are supposed to not only correct frequency, but phase alignment.
Phase correction.
Yeah. Okay.
If you have Trinoff, you can use phase correction on your loudspeakers and get them phase aligned really nicely. As far as room correction, it's like what is that? The serpent eating the tail.
Yeah, catch 22 or a circular.
It's catch 22. Yeah. You're going to change the response of the speaker because of what the room's doing to it. Mm-hmm. It may work at this position right here where you're sitting. You move over here, and it's not working anymore. It actually makes the room worse in other spots in the room. So if you have your client sitting in the back and you're mixing with correction, they're going to go, God, this sounds awful.
I know some engineers swear by it in terms of, they got an okay room, they've done some acoustic treatment, and at least for them, they seem to get better translation.
Yeah, it can help. It can help, but you have to remember that it's going to take away from over here and put it into here. And as you do more and more correction, this sweet spot becomes smaller and smaller. Okay. And I joke about it like put your head in a vice, don't move, and you'll be okay. But I'm adamantly opposed to the idea of a sweet spot. There's a position where you need to sit in the room front to back that you get the most even response of all the pressure areas. Okay, the most average, and that's the best place to sit. But in my room, you should be able to get up, pace back and forth around the room, and still hear imaging and frequency response fairly uniformly, no matter where you are. Your clients on the couch should be able to hear pretty much the way it's being mixed. Perhaps a little accentuated bass because they're closer to a partition, but not that much.
But relatively balanced. There shouldn't be this crazy difference. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You take a couple steps back or go over to the corner and you hear just something extremely different. In your design, you're aiming for a relative balance throughout the room. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's good to know because as important as it is for the engineer to be in the so-called sweet spot or in our listening position, making decisions, you don't want clients to come in or people to be in the room and hear something drastically different from what you're hearing, right? That can affect, their trust in you and their perception of what you're doing. And is this actually the right engineer for our project? You want them to be happy with what they're hearing at least as much as you are, if not more. They're the one that's their art at the end of the day that you're working on. You want them to be pleased with what they're hearing. So I think that's an important part.
They need to hear it like you hear it as much as possible.
Yeah.
A funny story. Ray Kennedy asked me if I could build a module into his console with a fader and some buttons and stuff, so that the producer could sit there and ride the fader. And of course, it's not connected to anything, but it has lights and stuff.
Yeah. The placebo effect, something for them to do. Oh, that sounds so much better.
How many times as a mix engineer, as a producer, come up to you and say, a little more bass on that, and you put your finger on it and you turn your hand, but you don't turn the knob, and you say, that's better. That's it.
That's funny. What would you say is your favorite part of your job? What do you enjoy the most about what you do?
Well, I enjoy I had much gratification from designing the studios. And one thing I got to tell you, I don't do it for you. I do it for me. And when I do it for me, I do the best I can possibly do, put the best ideas in there, as though it's mine, and it is mine. And then you get the very best that I can offer. So that's how I look at it. And I'm extremely happy when I see you guys happy and doing, being successful and doing some great stuff, it's marvelous. And,
that's a good point. It reminds me of, I think it's Rick Rubin, who talks about writing not for the audience, but for yourself, right? Yeah. Or, good art in general. I think good artists, good engineers, good design is I think most apparent when you do it for yourself. When you make it the best you can be. I feel the same way with songwriting or mixing or making music. When I have the freedom, and sometimes you don't always have that freedom. Sometimes you're working with a really picky client and you got to do your best or whatever. But the projects I'm most proud of, where I feel like I bring my best work, just like audiences can relate to a song that's authentic when they can hear the artist writing something that's authentic, and they're not trying to pander or chase the latest trend or craze. They're just making true art. That resonates with people.
Yeah. We do it for life. It's our life. This is what we do, and we do it the best we can. We're not chasing money or anything else. We're just doing it because this is what we do. If you chase the money, it's going to run from you.
Absolutely. Hardest thing to get right in studio acoustics. What would you say is the most challenging thing to get right?
And it's all challenging. It's all very challenging. I just did an interview with a fellow yesterday about, he's got a sort of like an A-frame area where he wants to put his mix room in. That's a challenge. But I love challenges. And when I get something that's a real challenge, I have to really do some figuring and hard thinking about it. That's fun. I get bored doing layouts. When I'm doing the layouts, putting dimensions and things and labeling stuff, boring. But designing it, when I'm putting it together, I go, okay, this could go here. Okay, I'm going to calculate this ray tracing and do the wave analysis. Okay, we need this here and here. Every single one is different, and it's challenging, but it's fun.
You'd say adapting your design to the different client spaces or needs, or
it's to the room, really. It's
to the room.
It's okay. You adapt whatever the room needs to give the listener an accurate representation of what's on tape. That is.
And how often are you designing from scratch? Builds like mine, where we're essentially you're sending me a plot. It's still some. There's still. Time. Yeah. Okay.
All the time. Yeah.
Versus working on an existing space or improving some kind of existing.
I've got a couple of existing spaces that we're doing, but a lot of them.
Usually, it's from the ground up.
Yeah, or we got an existing space, but we have to change some dimensions. So we build a wall here and do this there, cut a window out, whatever. Yeah.
Are there any rules of studio design you think people either misunderstand or overemphasize?
Yeah, a lot of times people put, doors in the front of studios or so they lose the ability to treat those areas that are very important, or windows where they shouldn't be. You can have, like windows on the side. They have it too far forward where there's just a specular reflection path. We have solutions for that too. I've had to put windows forward sometimes, and we'll put angled glass panes in the treatment around the window. We'll put angled glass panes that reflect it back. Away from the mixing position, so they don't get the specular reflections, things like that. And people try to angle their walls and stuff, and they cut corners off. Why would you do that? You could have trapping there. Save that space. Also, it's more difficult to build like that too. Build all these weird things, and you know, and you're not eliminating modes when you do that. You still have modes, no matter what.
So the angling of the walls, that's something you don't prefer or you avoid. At least in my plans, they're essentially rectangles, right? And then you treat the space. Yeah.
A rectangular cuboid is the easiest to build, the easiest to treat, and also the most predictable.
Right.
We want predictability. We want to know what we're getting. We don't want to build it and then test it and go, well, shit.
And it's probably really hard at that point to troubleshoot where the issue's coming from, especially if you have a really complex.
Max, do not. Come on, I'm trying to having a conversation here. You want me to talk to you? He goes. I asked him that. He goes. Okay. Do you want a treat?
Yeah, give him a treat. Good, Max. We're almost done, buddy. Looks like a good
dog. He's always been baby dog. No, he's 6 now, but he's still baby dog.
Yeah. How many dogs do you have?
2. I've got a beagle out there that's my wife's. And what a goofy mix, man. This thing is aggressive, and the Snoopy dog, you know, it's a beagle, is a Snoopy dog, and it's not very smart. Really funny. What do you want?
So how much would you say is acoustic design backed by data versus experience or just subjective opinion in terms of what you've observed?
Should be backed by data. By good science, good data, and experience. Experience plays big into it, you know. And for designers out there who are listening, get that experience. Make the mistakes, no problem. Go out and do it. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, and you're going to learn. You're going to learn and learn, and it's a growth process.
Well, it just reminds me. I meant to introduce you with a little bio. Maybe we'll put this at the front, or just so people can know. You've now built, is it over 1,100 studios worldwide? Is that right?
Yes.
So I'm sure those first, 10, 20, 100 studios, you made plenty of mistakes and learned from, your process and trying to do your best, just like it's us mix engineers or songwriters. We're all trying to do our best work, but you learn, you advance, you change what you do based on experience. That's how it should be. Yes. And you can't, there's no other way to get it, right? If you're not designing studios and measuring and doing your measurements after and then responding to that and trying to improve, there's a lot of things just have to be learned by experience, by doing it.
Yeah. It's funny. Both Ron and I are that type of person, well, if it's going to get done, I got to do it myself, kind of thing, oh shoot, I was going to say, one thing about, marketing and branding, you have to be careful. If you're a designer, you don't want to get stuck with an old model or old branding. Okay. You see a room, that's, well, a lot of my rooms are quite similar, but I have changed up things, and I keep changing up things to make them better. And are
there recent advancements in the research or the data or the tests you've done that have changed how you work?
Yes. We're continuing testing, doing tests for diffraction and understanding exactly how it works and what it does acoustically. And we have discovered over the past few years that diffraction will create a bloom of absorption around an object, so that, say, you have diffraction here, a blank wall here, and some absorption here. The blank wall will not give any reflections due to the cloud of diffraction that's covering it from the absorption, diffraction units, etc. So this is very informative.
So diffraction, so studying and learning more about diffraction.
Yes.
Well, I mean, one real world example you mentioned was the rear wall, right?
Years,
and is that an example of what you're talking about, diffraction and using
well,
diffraction?
no, that is more a pressure wave breakup.
Okay.
So you could, when you're mixing your speakers, like you got some fine speakers there, they're going to produce a pressure wave, probably becoming a plane wave right behind you. And that plane wave, you get front and back. Plane wave would move from the front and well, it'll envelop, it's spherical, then it envelops into a plane wave towards the back of the room and smacks on that back wall and bounces back. And that plane wave travels through the room like that. And it's going to comb filter on your ear with the oncoming sound. But instead of flapping back and forth quite a few times before it reduces its intensity, we put a curve on the rear wall so that plane wave just breaks up. Just comes in, breaks up.
Okay, yeah. And in terms of what you've learned about diffraction, how have you incorporated that into your designs? Is it mainly in the design of the modular panels that you build, or the placement of diffraction?
Yeah, the 510, 511 series. I got the idea from my friend Budget Petrovic, known as Boggy in gear sluts.
Yeah.
And he passed away. We had a meeting scheduled 2 weeks after he died. We had scheduled a meeting, and we were going to talk about stuff. I was going to help him with some things, and gone. But he had these diffraction units that he built, and he called them air transparent diffusers. They're not, but they're more like, well, they're base transparent. So, but they're slats on the edge. So what I did, I designed a slats on edge at a prime 17. So you get the phase change off the edge reflection. Also get diffraction from the edges, and then the base just goes right straight through, and we have absorption behind. And bam, does magic. I got the GLL files, just like when you test speakers. At the lab in the free field, you can test these diffusers or diffraction units, and it'll tell you phase change at all the different frequencies and all the diffraction and the reflection bloom. You get the balloon, like the speaker balloon. It's amazing. And so we see what's going on with those guys.
So did you have different iterations? Like you started with one design and kind of iterated on that, or is it just
I got lucky with the original calculations and just
cool.
Yeah, and it's still going. The thing is, this will be interesting to note that those units, you get your 510, 511 units, whatever -1, -2, or just plain 510.
I think we got both of them in my design. Yeah.
They do exactly the same thing, but they're different purpose, different places. And they operate primarily at 18 kilohertz. They work at 9 as well. And all that diffraction and the phase change in those areas give the person in the room the experience of space. You just hear, wow, it's more spacious. Psycho acoustics. And they do not interfere with your perception of the mix. So they don't, they're lower in level. You get reflection from them? No. You get a lot of diffraction, diffraction is absorption. Because anytime sound energy strikes an edge, it will bend. Any bending of the energy creates heat.
Diminishes,
The heat is absorption.
Interesting. Okay,
Simple.
yeah. Is that similar to Thomas? I don't know how to pronounce his last name. John, northward. Jean, yeah. Thomas.
Yeah.
But I know Thomas does his front to back design, which is essentially a non-environment design, as far as I can understand it, but with some sort of special diffraction or some kind of thing. My understanding is to create.
I believe they are, that he puts in the head and in the back. They do what they do. Not really what Peter D'Antonio says they do. They operate at the frequency of the block. The block size, let's say it's 2 inches, 2-inch blocks. That's going to be operational 6 kilohertz. Diffraction and phase change at that frequency. If there are wells in there, like holes, where you got blocks and you got this kind of well there, that well becomes a pressure absorber because the sound enters into the well and it will compress against the back. That wave, it will compress that at those frequencies. And so it's also an absorber there. Diffraction of the edges diffract, and that's absorption. Phase change you get from the flat faces to specular, and it's here, and then it's back here, and it's over here, different delays. So when you combine all the delays, you get a bloom of diffusion. It's not diffusion, it's called phase change is what it is.
Phase change, okay.
Phase change. And we sense that as space.
So at least in terms of your philosophy behind those, that's what they're there for, is to create the sense of space and make it seem more natural and not impact the actual acoustics, or, at least in terms of the speakers and the reflections.
Correct.
And all that.
Yes. It's for human comfort only, but it should not affect what you hear from the speakers.
Very cool. All right, 2 more questions. What can people expect to receive from you when they work with you? What are your deliverables in terms of support and all that? What do they get when they hire you as a designer?
Full support like this. Email and this and WhatsApp. WhatsApp's very handy. Ask me anything. If I don't know, I'll tell you. I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
They also get 3D models in AutoCAD and SketchUp. They get full printouts. PDF.
Yeah, the SketchUp, by the way, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say the SketchUp, at least in my case, was really helpful because I could zoom in on stuff and you have the 3D model right there to show contractors, especially for me working with people that speak Spanish. They can't always read the English plans. I have to kind of do my best to translate them. But SketchUp's really handy because you can zoom in on something and see it from below and above and from the side and say, hey, this is what it's supposed to look like. Yeah. Even if they don't completely understand the plans, you can print that out or show it to them or send them screenshots, send them WhatsApp images. And I've had to do that a bunch to get over some of these hurdles and cross that translation barrier. And so anyways, sorry to interrupt, but that's been a super helpful part of my build, at least, was having that SketchUp 3D model.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do on layouts, for blueprints. But then you go, well, what about this part that's like there? I see it on the isometric, but how do I measure? Yeah. So it's real handy to have a model to go to and be able to measure.
Super handy. Plus, it's just cool. You get to kind of see a 3D rendering of what the space is going to look like. It's fun.
Yeah.
Cool. So so blueprints, PDFs, really detailed PDFs. Another thing I appreciate is that you give instructions to the contractors on exactly what materials to get, and you have a bunch of links, and we have access, to drop all the Dropbox files.
Folders, which, if you're a full service, you get my isolation folder and the treatment folder, and those alone are probably worth the price of my fee. Stuff in there. There's stuff in there that we're not using in the build, but you can look at it and go, "Ooh, maybe I'll build this next year." Whatever. There you go. I get some ideas, but and all the papers that I've written are in there.
And in terms of room analysis, measurement, and support after post build, what does that look like?
Together, I'll help you with adjustment of your speakers. If it involves crossovers or adjustment between your speakers and your sub to get that phase aligned and and working right, leveled up. I work right with you. We do a Zoom meeting and just do it together. Did you get that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, there's a little bit of lag, so sometimes, and it's probably my network, but that's all right. I can edit the videos together, so hopefully it's a little bit smoother. But this has been a wealth of information, masterclass in acoustics. And I know a lot of engineers, if they're like me, some of this is over your head. It's complex science. Like I said, the whole reason I wanted to hire you is because I don't want to do it all myself. We all work with what we've got. And if you're at home making a home setup and you got, your free resources are a huge help, regardless of where you're at as an engineer or a producer or whatever. Those are huge helps just to kind of get your feet wet and understand what's important. But really having a pro design and expert level, support and mentorship and the PDFs and all that to guide me, so I'm not just wasting money or building something that's not going to do what I want it to do, has been a huge help. And I really appreciate your expertise and how generous you are with your time and your knowledge and sharing the latest advancements and your openness to the science and the data and constantly adapting and improving your designs. I think that's a rare thing to find. And so, yeah, I can't be happier with how it's turned out in my experience.
Thank you. Can I put a plug in for my masterclass?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Where can people find out more about what you're doing currently? Tell us about the masterclass and anything else you'd like me to
briefly. I have a intro video on the school platform for the masterclass. I'll give you a link for it. Okay. Great. Ron Sorrow and I are covering all the topics on acoustics for, whatever you want to use it for. I'm not targeting necessarily only studios, but the main topic for most people is sound, spaces for sound. So
sure. Yeah, it could be home theater or corporate space you're trying to design, make your acoustic better and auditorium.
Basic, the scientific process and the physics of acoustics and basic physics. And it's not complicated. It's a presentation, and we talk. We don't go through a bunch of formulas. But if they need to do work physics, well, I highly recommend Mathematics for a Practical Man. They can go through all the sections and finally get up to calculus, and it's easy to learn once you start at the beginning and go through those books. They're old books from the 60s. They're great. But as far as our masterclass goes, we're covering all the topics that one would want and need about acoustics. And we talk a lot about the testing. We show the details and the data and everything. So it's a fun course. We're having fun doing it.
So cool. Yeah, well, let's hope the next generation of acousticians and designers takes that up, and from someone who has the kind of experience you and Ron have, who have built at this point over 1,000, professional spaces. Any aspiring acoustician out there or designer, check it out, because I'm sure it's a wealth of information. And
thank you. I'll make one point.
We'll post the link and on all the info.
Yeah, during the course, I'm not trying to teach the way I do it. I'm just trying to teach the facts, and you'll develop your own way of doing it, however that may be. It's perfectly fine. That's one thing. I just wanted to mention it's not. Oh, I'm going to teach you how I do it, and this is the only way you should do it.
Yeah,
that's not true. That's not true.
So the principles, the data, and the science, and your experience, but. Very cool. We'll definitely post that. And I'm excited to finish this studio and to continue working with you, John. Hopefully we'll have you on again. I am just starting this out, so we only have a few videos. But as this channel progresses and I keep posting more, I I'm definitely not, an influencer type or someone is constantly creating content. I kind of dislike social media, to be honest. Like, I try to stay away from it as much as possible. But the cool thing of modern technology and YouTube and social media is that you can find truly world-class experts and just learn. It's an endless amount of information. And if you know where to look, you can find just so many gold nuggets and wisdom, years of experience and expertise that someone like yourself has to offer. So that's the good side of the internet, I would say. So we're trying to do our part to share that. And I highly recommend, John, for anyone out there who has questions. I know you offer a free first consultation for people who are thinking about this, or not sure, or they just have some questions. That's a great way, I think, to get your questions answered and take that first step to having a great space to work in. So thanks again, John. I'd love to have you back on. There's lots more we could discuss. I didn't cover all my questions, but at some point down the road, that'd be great if you're up for it.
Anytime, Nate. Anytime. Thank you.